Thanks very much for joining me. How have you been, Ralph?
I've been fine, thanks, John. Looking
Yeah.
forward to it.
So thanks very much. Okay, so just to jump straight in, there was kind of an exciting moment. I guess you could say exciting moment that you were describing to me in a previous call where you were, I believe, coming out of Besbrook Mill on a helicopter and you started to get mortared in the middle of it.
Yeah, that's right. It was in 1987. I was in B Company of my regiment. We were on the top. We descend down what is called the Metal Mountain, which is a fire escape, external fire escape to the helipad. This is a routine patrol, 4 of us in a Lynx helicopter. We get about, I would say, 15 meters off the ground, and suddenly it's difficult to describe what I actually saw straight away. I saw lots of stuff. It was very kinetic. It was I noticed guys falling inside the Besbrook Mill compound. Then I saw a flatbed, so like a lorry, with improvised mortars on the back of the flatbed, and what they were firing was, in effect, fire extinguishers packed with what we call dockyard confetti. That means razor blades, nails, bits of glass. It's an ugly business. And also the shrapnel from the fire extinguishers. Now,
Sorry, how far would this flatbed that you could see?
it was literally we were taking off from the helipad, and I have to be careful with my memories. I could see it, so I'm 15 meters up, let's say, in a Lynx helicopter, which is a helicopter with good vision. You can see all around you in a Lynx, not like a Puma where you can't see anything. I could see it. It was already abandoned, and it was next to, if you imagine the mill as a large compound, industrial or commercial compound, walled off. Okay, the flatbed was right next to the wall. And I mean, for me, the question is how on earth it got there in the first place was a mystery. But that's not my regiment's problem. We weren't guarding that facility. I don't want to blame anyone, but there it was. So I saw it very clearly. I was almost in a unique situation but the IRA wanted to get a chopper badly. This was before I think the IRA actually hit a chopper, and we were gone. I'd seen people fall. I saw a friend of mine called Dave hit badly, and I was just, what amazes me of that time is okay, so that's happened. And although I had this kind of, you put all of that away, all that emotion, you pack it away somewhere, and I don't know where it comes out, but we were gone. And then it was the patrol that began to take over my mind. I was the Brick commander. Brick is just a 4-man patrol.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, like when you actually realize that, oh shit, I'm getting bloody mortared here, and being in a helicopter, I'm in quite a vulnerable position. What was it like just on a feelings level?
It's difficult to say because actually I felt safe. And I think every time I've ever been involved in any kind of what isn't the buzzword now is kinetic activity, when you're being fired at or whatever, or whether there's an explosion, all of the stuff that you would, I'm sure it's true for a lot of people, firefighters and civilians in a car crash. This happens, and you have to deal with a load of stuff afterwards. Suddenly we were gone in the chopper, and the pilot of the chopper was very skillful. I mean, that, in a way that goes without saying, but he knew his job was to get us out of there ASP. So I remember seeing my friend fall. I remember seeing that the one odd thing that stuck in my mind was I noticed for the first time blue siren light, like a police car, like an old-fashioned police car, spinning on the top of a porter cabin, and I that struck me as odd because I'd never noticed it before. but that was it. You know, I'm talking about 15 seconds perhaps of oversight of that incident, and we were gone.
Okay, it's interesting. You said that they were essentially firing like old fire extinguishers that have been stuffed full of explosives and shrapnel. Was this like the standard way to do things?
I believe so. The idea of being mortared was certainly not new at that stage. And you know, I don't want to blame any. There is an issue about, and I remember there being discussion about an issue about how a flatbed, because it's completely open, could get that close to an army base. But that's for someone else to discuss. But no, mortaring was a standard. I think mortaring tended to be for RUC stations, which are extremely vulnerable. And often, if you look at the footage on YouTube, you can see quite a lot of it now. You can see RUC stations with a lot of netting over it, and that is for mortar bombs. That is for mortar bombs. So, and that goes back years. That goes back. I mean, I joined my battalion very late in Londonderry in 1979, but this goes back a long time. So the mortar wasn't a great development.
I was going to say, I think I'm fairly sure I'm correct in saying that the single largest taking of RUC lives in one go was actually from a mortar that came straight down into I think it was like a kind of a porta cabin being used like a lunchroom.
That sounds very IRA. I mean, I'm not a great historian of the conflict. Subsequently, I have read about the history of Ireland and the history, like things like the Easter Rising. I felt a kind of duty to buck my ideas up a bit with that, because when I joined in 1978, I was a 17-year-old. You can't go to Northern Ireland until you're 18. You can go to war at 17, but not to Northern Ireland. That was a weird thing. So I was on rear party for a while, and I didn't. You asked me, did I feel that I was a legitimate target at that age? Absolutely, absolutely. I felt that this was not a new word in modern warfare is peer level conflict, where you're having an army against another army which is similarly equipped. Now, this wasn't a peer level conflict. And sometimes it reminds me, I know a lot of French soldiers for the different reasons who served in Algeria. And that reminds me a little bit of Northern Ireland. You're heavy-handed. I'm not saying the British Army is heavy-handed, but I can't remember. I think there's about 33,000 troops deployed across the 6 counties. That's a lot of manpower. The IRA obviously doesn't stretch to that. So I felt myself a legitimate target. But at the age of 18, I think we spoke briefly over the telephone, John, about the Royal Army Education Corps. It would astonish me if that still exists. But we had lessons on Irish history about the Irish situation before a tour. That made up part of the extensive training before you go on what is known as a roulement tour. Roulement is a French word meaning it's a rolling. You go, then you get taken over. But 6 months or 4 months, you get taken over by another battalion. But I didn't have very well developed thoughts as a soldier. I had finished training. For me, the IRA was the enemy in a kind of very basic, uninformed way.
Like when you say that you would consider yourself like a legitimate target, like for example, like if your patrol or something was attacked, you would feel like, okay, fair enough. It's not like they've done kind of something unreasonable or fucking brutal. You know, fair enough. I'm in their country. Would it be like that?
It's exactly like that, and I'll probably cut some flack on this on this subject. For me, one of the things that annoys me is if British soldiers kill a terrorist, it's a great military action. Okay, if one of them kills us, it's murder, and for me that doesn't work at all. Now there are limits to that. If the bombing in Enniskillen was can't even remember the year. It was an absolute atrocity against human life, against humanity, against human beings, against women, against pregnant people. That's not what I'm talking about. But I remember a young lad, I think I can mention his name, was Danny O'Callaghan. He was a 20-year-old provo. I liked him. I mean, I felt, we could go for a pint, and I knew guys I joined up in the era of Margaret Thatcher's Britain when the mines closed, and when I was at basic training, it was full of ex-miners, and many of them felt, look, if the boot was on the other foot, maybe I'd be out there with such and such a brigade or such and such a brigade doing the same thing. I look at names like Rossley, Derry. If you look at the names, these are Irish names. They're not British names. But I'm getting off the subject. That's something I didn't think at the time. I did think, however, that I was a legitimate target. And we lost a guy in Fermanagh. We lost a guy very early. And it's very sad, but he signed up for that. We all signed up for that. The mate who fell during the mortar attack, he fell. I'd served with him in Fermanagh. He was a superb soldier, decent human being. He was a father. He signed up. We signed up for it. That's my view today. I don't think that view has changed.
Okay, so yeah, just as we'll get into like your joining, but just you mentioned you told me before that particular soldier that you lost, I think within like the kind of first 2 weeks, you said that Jim Lina was actually your kind of
I don't know why I associate Jim Lina with that, but what I would say is that Jim Lina was a very high-profile name during that tour. Now, that's Fermanagh. Now, he's East Tyrone, okay? But right. East Tyrone...
He's from Monaghan, but yeah.
But East Tyrone, that sits like on the top of a triangle. You have Fermanagh and you have South Armagh. It is quite possible that my memory is scrambled on that. But James Lina was a massive... It is possible that he was the most wanted man in the province at that time, and that is why we had such a big thing about him. I mean, there were others. James Lina's dead, so I can, I feel happy talking about him. You corrected me when we spoke that actually Lina was East Tyrone and not South Armagh. For some reason, I thought he was South Armagh, and I don't know why I thought that. But at the time, there were so many names. I mean, we had, when we went, I can't remember if we took them with us, but there were these like filer faxes full of photographs.
The cue cards, right?
The cue cards with so many faces, and you do remember that. But James Lina was, despite the fact that it wasn't our county, East Tyrone. I've never been to East Tyrone. James Lina was a big figure, was a big, enormous name, and there was this sense that if you could get James Lina, that would be enormous. That would be enormous. But if you got, I don't really want to mention names. I don't know whether they're still alive or not. But if you got so and so, that's less of a thing.
Actually, speaking of names that are like Lina considered like legends amongst Republicans, there was the one name that comes to people's mind when they think of Fermanagh would be Seamus McElwain,
who
died
was
in
who
in
was killed.
86 at
Yeah,
quite a young age. I
yeah.
think he was like mid-20s. Yeah. Did you
I
ever
think
hear of him on your?
I did, but I think he died well after, just before I went to South Armagh. I think he was killed. So he was a name. But during Fermanagh, I was in what was known as COP, which means close observation platoon or close observation troop if you're in the Royal Marines. And we weren't working. We were detached from our regiments, and there's a difference between intelligence, working from intelligence and being driven by very specific. If you go on patrol in South Armagh and you're dropped off, of course, the patrol is driven by general intelligence. They're driven by this. They know roughly the state of play. But if your patrol or operation is driven by specific intelligence, that's another matter altogether. And you're not going to be there for long, because either it pans out as the intelligence people have said, or it doesn't pan out. And so you're on the ground in what is called hard routine. And that's a very tough aspect of soldiering. The Parachute Regiment Pathfinders do it. Royal Marines Mountain Leaders do it. And that's in conventional warfare. But of course, Northern Ireland throws up these contexts. The SAS was stretched. The British Army became stretched. I remember in 1987 in South Armagh, I lost, he wasn't killed, he was taken away from me. My company sergeant major, absolutely superb bloke, came in one day and said, "You're losing Private so-and-so, senior soldier, been there, done it, etc. And instead, you're going to have this TA bloke, Territorial Army." Now, I don't want to disrespect the Territorial Army, but they're not trained for that.
They're kind of weekend soldiers, no?
With Saturdays and Sundays was the joke. SAS, Saturdays and Sundays was the joke. He was a nice guy, but he left, and this is probably on my shoulders, he left a piece of electronic countermeasure equipment called a white sifter. That was a code name for the piece of equipment. I know that I spoke to someone the other day and they reminded me all the other different frequency. These were means of blocking IRA radio controlled explosive devices, improvised explosive devices. And sometimes when you were, anyway, to cut this story short, I wasn't in the habit of asking my men, "Do you have all of your stuff?" We're waiting for the links to come in and take us out. That's a particularly tender moment. That's a vulnerable moment. And one thing I would like to say on here is the Army Air Corps were astonishing pilots. But we got on board. We get back to Besbrook Mill. He tells me, he says to me, "I've left the white sifter." Now, that means that the Royal Engineers and a battalion or a company has to go out, secure the area. That was an enormous fuck up, if I can say that. And I guess it falls on me. I should have said to this guy, "Have you got the white sifter?" But I wasn't used to. That was a huge. Yeah. So that was something that's very vivid in my. The thing is, I never got a bollocking, and I did say to this guy, at least he had the decency and the bollocks to sort of front up as soon as possible. I mean, he could have done it in the chopper, but he didn't. He did it during the int brief, and okay, that was a terrible day. Terrible day.
God, there must have been the possibility in your mind that possibly someone had spotted it, told the IRA, and now they have it booby-trapped or something.
That's exactly how it works. We call the people, when you're out on patrol in a sort of rural context, you are being dicked, and that means that That's what we call. So you see people away on a hill, and they're dicking you. Farmers, they're not members of the IRA, but they are sympathetic. They don't much like the British going through their stuff and stopping their cars, etc., etc. And I can understand that, but you have to be very careful. What you say, what if you do come across them, you have to be very careful what you say. But that's exactly right. If they notice you've left something out there, that risk that it's booby-trapped, that's why the Royal Engineers were deployed, and at least a company of infantry were deployed to protect the sappers whilst they recovered this device. It's the whole idea of British Army movement in places like Fermanagh down on the border, okay, Armagh, South Armagh down on the border, is that you can't walk through a gap in a hedge. That's suicide, literally suicide. They use base plates, pressure pads in the gaps. So you have to carve your way through blackthorn hedges. And that's another way of losing stuff, because they rip all your pouches and stuff off. And if you lose them, we were absolutely, that's part of our Northern Ireland training. Do not lose stuff. If you go through a hedge, check everything, all your pouches. So yes, that was that was a bleak day for me. That experience of having someone who'd left that stuff out.
Just going back to like the way you'd have viewed you and your men would have viewed the likes of the more prolific kind of IRA fellas like in your area, kind of well, not exactly in your area, but like Lina, Seamus McIlwain. Would you have had on some level, maybe not admire them, but like a good deal of respect, and like maybe seen them like on your level, you know what I mean, in terms of like their ability to soldier, even though they were a guerrilla soldier and you're a conventional, proper, trained soldier?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, we were warned to have big respect. That's part of your training. If you talk about McIlwain and Lina, and there are others. I mean, some of whom you actually meet in the streets of places like Belleek, Roslay, Lisnaskey. You actually meet them, and they're not on the run. They're not OTR. So some of these people you actually meet, you know who they are. For instance, they might be a quartermaster for a certain brigade. And some of these people, I remember a guy, I'm not going to mention his name, but he made me laugh because when we saw him, he was a bit like Inspector Clouseau trying to hide, and we'd already seen him. But people like Lina, I mean, Lina was a bad news for us. And I still go back to that incident in Belleek in Fermanagh where we lost someone very quickly. And I still don't fully understand my train of thought for associating that with Lina. But yes, absolutely. You're playing cowboys and Indians here. This is a very, very serious business. And that we knew that they train in Libya, for instance. They go to Libya for under Gaddafi's regime, they went to Libya to train, much as ISIS trained, much as the Taliban, the Mujahideen trained. I mean, these weren't cowboys, that's for sure. No, so we had enormous respect for them. If it was grudging, fine, it was grudging, but it was respect that you were against a serious opponent and you don't muck about.
If someone had come along to you, like in in your early years or any of your years there, and said, look, these people that you're fighting against are freedom fighters, would you have like argued with them on that?
At that time, I'm not sure. I can't read the history back into my state of mind. But now, I would say, okay, if we can put to one side the guys who bombed Enniskillen, say, the guys who attacked mainland Britain,
Kingsmill massacre, sorry.
Yeah, but the soldiers I mentioned, Danny O'Callaghan. For me, he was a freedom fighter. Certainly looking back, but even then, I thought you know, look, we're not buddies, but we'd have a little chuckle when we met in the street. And that doesn't mean, what does that mean? It doesn't mean we're stupid. It doesn't mean he's stupid. But I remember having a stupid bet with somebody called Black Tom. I saw Black Tom. I won't say he was in Fermanagh. I won't say his surname, but he was, you have to be very careful when you speak in the street. Okay. And I'm talking about, well, certainly in places like Derry and Belfast, you have to be very careful. Who says what? How you speak to the people in the street, and especially when you're stopping people on the queue cards, because they will start interrogating you in a very natural way. And I remember, I think it was in South Armagh, I had a guy in my patrol who was Italian he had Italian blood, that's not even relevant, but he was a good talker. And so I gave him the job. Look, as a commander, I haven't got the time to be dealing with people who talk to us in the street. You do it, because they will ask you questions. For instance, with the electronic countermeasure equipment, it meant out of 4 men, everyone's got an antenna. And that's odd. And the Irish pick up on that very quickly. Why have all you guys got antennas? I needed somebody to take that heat off me, because I've got other things. I've got better, not better things, but I've got other things to do, looking where we're going. And I had a guy in my patrol, Tony, his name was. He was excellent at just flipping this whole script and saying, what are you doing out and about today? And how's it going with your wife? And he was very good. We call them chat up men. And so you had to be, there's always this, and I was quite proud of that as a British soldier, because we're not out there trying to, even with people on the queue cards, we're not out there trying to beat them up or torture them. I don't know what goes on at higher intelligence levels. I have no idea about that. I dread to think, but, my job was a humble job of being a professional soldier in what became a counterinsurgency operation, a counter-terrorist operation. And I do look back on these people, a lot of them specifically as freedom fighters. And people say one man's terrorist, another man's freedom fighter. That's a familiar saying. And I do. I have absolutely. I read somewhere, in fact, I saw a YouTube thing in which British soldiers were actually going. This is well after Good Friday. British soldiers were actually going back to meet known players and to meet with them and have a drink and discuss the differences in there. And I thought I would quite like to do that. Let me put it this way: I'd be prepared to do that if I was asked, because it's finished. In many ways, it's finished. I say that I looked on. I just wanted to check the security alert level on MI5 published what the security alert level is in Northern Ireland, and it only recently, I think it was only recently, came down to severe. Before that, it was actually still. No, it came down from severe to substantial, something like that, which meant there are threats around for the PSNI. And I was surprised about that. I thought maybe it would be a bit lower than that. And I don't know how that pans out, and that's not my job. But I when I came out of the army, and I went to university, I came to France. I looked at my past a little bit. I read up on the Easter Rising, and I do find that fascinating, and I do understand. I looked up. One of the things that interests me is place names. Derry is not Londonderry, and if someone says, I don't say I went to Londonderry. I say I went to Derry, and it's not for me. It's not a massive thing, but it's just a concession. It's a concession to a culture whose members are very, very passionate that their past is acknowledged. And I feel historically they are in the right.
Actually, on the note about a meetup, that's something I'd love to do in the future. sitting down with, you know, an ex-Republican, an ex-British Army, or ex-Republican, ex-loyalist. Great idea. I think it's I think it would be something very important to do. Funny, I read a story about the fella, he was in the RAF. His name is Mike Johnson. I couldn't for the life of me track down like a Facebook thing or an email or anything to contact him. I wish I could, but I saw an article that he said he was once shot down, I think in South Armagh, no one injured or died, but he actually kind of had like a burning urge to meet the people who did and talk to them. Yeah, that kind of thing would be fascinating. Just one more thing, if those fellas, like, if you could look back and see them now as being freedom fighters, I'm not trying to put you on the spot at all, but by implication, would that make you like someone who was like oppressing someone's freedom?
That's an excellent question, and it's obviously it is, in a sense, it's the next question. I would hate to turn in on myself and say I was an oppressor. What I will say is, I think I was part of an armed forces that shouldn't have been there had history played out in in a more neutral light. I mean, but then we go back to the Ulster plantation, which goes back to the 17th century, the Ulster plantation, perhaps before that. So the other thing is some absolutely appalling stuff was committed by both paramilitary factions. Appalling stuff that, for me, falls outside the scope of being an honest freedom fighter or a soldier. But I an oppressor? I didn't feel like a Nazi. Let me put it that way. I felt that. I remember searching. I only ever worked near the border, and I remember having to search some very humble, to put it mildly, dwellings. I live in rural France, and I see these dwellings today. This is a huge, almost like a peasantry still in areas of rural France who are subsistence farmers. And I saw that in South Armagh, I saw that in Fermanagh. And I had to search them. And I wanted them to know that, look, I don't want you to like me. I don't want you to like me, but I am going to do this as thoroughly as possible, but without encroaching on your dignity as much as I can possible. I want to do that without encroaching on your dignity. And I want to make sure that everything goes back exactly as we found it. And I'm not speaking on my behalf. I'm speaking on my regiment's behalf, largely. And I think I'm speaking on behalf of the British Army and Royal Marines. I think those attitudes are going to be fairly widespread, not universal. Like I said, I will probably cop some flack from, but I always wonder where this flack is coming from. Is it coming from ex-UDR, ex-RUC? I had some odd, and this is just personal experiences. I'm not generalizing, but I had some odd experiences with the RUC and the UDR. Got shot at twice by them, so
I was going, okay, we'll put a bookmark on the UDR RUC because I do want to ask you that. Just go back to what you're saying, the kind of approach you had that was more humanity taken into account, like you said there, like taking into account people's dignity and stuff when you're
hearts and minds. It was drummed into us. I mean, it was drummed into us. Hearts and minds. You've got to win hearts and minds if you're going to, and yet have this professional ability to respond to a contact, to a firefight, etc., etc.
No,
so there would. For me, that's normal soldiering. If you're ever a soldier in a combat zone, you're going to meet civilians, and you're going to have to treat them properly within the rules.
Especially when it's like in a regular war.
Especially when it's like
it's not like an all war.
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of people now, in fairness, like a lot of people would scoff at the idea that like that most British Army fellas at the time would have taken a similar approach. I can see what they mean. In fairness, now I think it's one of those things where like one like one rude soldier or one soldier who has the complete opposite mentality that you're describing, he can undo the good work.
He can do a lot of that. They can do a lot of damage.
Of like 100 polite fellas. Yeah. So like, I mean, you could understand like a lot of people who were there at the time saying like the British Army didn't really approach searching people and searching their stuff with this mentality. You could understand that from them.
Totally. And unfortunately, like you say, one rude soldier or ill-disciplined, because that's what it is. That shouldn't be happening. The commanders, local commanders, from corporals to lieutenants to captains, that shouldn't be happening. If you're gobbing off to a civilian, that shouldn't be happening, and that's a problem with local leadership. And but I do understand. I do not expect any gratitude from the Irish people for doing my job. I don't expect that, but I'm just saying I felt those emotions. I felt motivated in that way, and it goes back to what you were saying about, were you legit? Did you feel a legitimate target? I did. I did, and I developed, oddly, a kind of, not a love of Ireland, that's far too vague and romantic, but I felt, God, these people are going through the ringer. These people are going through the ringer, and it's not clear to me how you solve this other than putting down your arms. And that wasn't my job. So I've heard, and I will get, if this goes on to YouTube, I will get some stuff back, some flack about, and that doesn't bother me. I work with some very, very professional soldiers who were also decent human beings. And I think that the IRA produced some very courageous freedom fighters who were also decent human beings. And I think history has got us right into the sort of into a tangle, and perhaps I do feel it is difficult. I mean, if we're going to sort of say, how do you unpick the Ulster plantation? I heard Lord Dannatt, an ex-chief of the General Staff of the British Army, saying, "Oh, we were talking about reunion of Ireland. There was a program about the the unification of Ireland." And I heard Dannatt say, and I served under Dannatt, and I heard him say, "Oh, well, if you're going to do that, you must protect the Protestants. You must protect the Unionists." But from what? Is there a direct threat against all Protestants? It's not obvious that there is. So rather than saying that, say something more positive. If you're saying, again, I will get a lot of flack for this, but I'm not bothered. I thought that was a stupid thing to say in the spirit of pacifying a war zone. And it was a dreadful war zone. You only have to speak to people like me, to people who were there much earlier than me in the terrible days of when we ceased to be protecting the Catholic community, and suddenly it had all gone pear-shaped. And there were I remember McGurk's bar. I wasn't there, but that was an enormous episode. The eviction of in Belfast, evictions from Catholic estates, from Catholic enclaves of Catholics, all those things. It is so complicated. I'm glad that the Good Friday Agreement, for whatever it's worth, has happened, and that there are fewer deaths. But as someone who was there, I would now say I see a lot of logic for a united Ireland. And again, I will get flack for that, but I do see a logic that would do that. If it could be done in a way that preserved certain values. I don't mean of the Orange men. I've always been a bit suspicious of the Orange Order, but of Protestant people who just want to go about their daily life and have businesses, and I'm not really interested in those who want to celebrate and commemorate. Something had to give. But anyway, I played for my sins. I played my part.
Yeah, on that note, I mean, to be fair, no, I could certainly understand like modern day unionists having a very, very legitimate concern that if there was an Irish reunification, that they would be left as like this huge, or not a huge minority, but like very much a minority, and there would be those who would want to use that opportunity against them. To be honest with you, this is just me kind of thinking about theorizing, but I could see it happening where like a kind of small core of loyalists, if a real proper reunification process came about and it looked like it was very much on the horizon, I could see a small core of modern day loyalists maybe getting violent in order to get in the way of that, and then fighting because of that, and
Then
and
it starts, yeah.
yeah, but like at the beginning of the Troubles and throughout it, the Unionists were at different stages very much worried about the British government selling them out and just saying fuck it, leave them.
That's still alive. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, John. I understand that, and I want to emphasize at this point something that was often made clear by UDR, by RUC, that you're just here for like a snapshot, 4 months, 6 months, sometimes 18 months on for the residential tours. But you're just here. You'll come here, you'll go home. And we have to live here. And I do recognize that if you don't live there, you don't really have a big stake in it. Doesn't matter whether you were a soldier or not. It doesn't matter whether you serve there. If you don't live there, you haven't got a stake in it. And so I can say these things. It's very easy for me to say this, that, and the other. I don't have a stake in it. I want people to have peace. I want there to be no more killings. But further down the road, I mean, is the current situation Stormont is functioning as I understand finally, or is there still a problem with the DUP? I can't remember, because there was this horrible delay when Sinn Féin was so successful in the elections that I think the DUP refused to make common cause with them in Stormont. So there's still that political tension.
Just one more thing on the note, the reunification. I think it's of the utmost importance. I mean, very, very seriously important that, in my opinion, when this comes around in the coming decades, and when Ireland eventually does get reunited, I do think it will, and it'll come via votes, like political means. Very at the utmost importance that it's done without taking an opportunity to be kind of vitriolic from the national point of view, being vitriolic over the unionists and the loyalists, or even having a go now that they'd be a bit more vulnerable. It's like hugely important that doesn't happen when this eventually does roll around. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
Sorry, go on, John.
No, you're fine. Go on.
No, I agree with that. I like I say, I don't have a stake in it. I live in France. I'm a French national, French and British national, but it's the people who are there. It's like I said, I looked up there's a security threat on MI5's website, and it's still substantial. That means the PSNI are sort of on a terrorist footing, on an anti-terrorist footing. But no, that I just want peace. I would like there to be peace, and I don't know whether the unionist community can somehow endure inside a Republic of Ireland.
Sorry, but before I ask about the RUC UDR, when you were interacting with the public in various ways, be it a search or be it stopping people in the street or blah blah blah, Did you get the sense that like most of them appreciated the approach that you took, the more kind of human approach? I can understand if you're more of a hardliner being like fuck off, you're a polite oppressor is still an oppressor, so it doesn't matter if you're smiling at me and stuff. Did you get the sense that people generally like appreciated the approach?
Not at all, not at all. No, never. Nowhere I ever walked was there a sense of, oh, you're thanks for at least trying. No, not at all. We got a lot of abuse. I remember having soiled nappies thrown at us in the Rossville flats. People didn't like us. And I only ever served really in hardline Republican areas, except once in Ballykinler in Portadown, which doesn't even count. It's not even worth a medal. A campaign service medal or general service medal. It's you can walk around there without weapons practically. I only ever served in quite hardline areas, and there was no one. The only concessions were from what we call players, members of the IRA, not on the run, but visible in the streets. And then you would have this game of poker with them. And that always struck me as interesting. And what you can't do in that situation is start swearing and you provo twat or anything like that. They can't attack you, you British bastard. It doesn't get them anywhere. It's not a good way for the IRA to pursue its ends, intelligence-wise, and it's not a good way for the British Army to pursue its ends. So there was this almost absurd level of civility, sometimes humor between us. I'm talking about soldiers on the street and people on the players list on the cue card.
I'm going to say you said ironically enough, like the higher up you went in terms of like their prolificness or whatever, the more of an effort.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to. These aren't people on the run. I mean, if they're on the run, you're in a arrest or shooting situation. James Liner was always on the run. Whenever I served, James Liner was always. McElwain was on the run. Kevin McNamee. I mean, I don't want to throw these names out too willy-nilly, but these guys were on the run, and our interactions were governed by what we called a yellow card. That means that you had to shout "Stop, Army! Stop, or I fire," or something like that. I can't remember the exact words. But no, the people themselves. I remember hard targeting from hard targeting when you break out of in this case it was Crossmaglen police station, which is heavily fortified. It really is like the OK Corral. Hard targeting is coming out of the exit and moving side, zigzagging and taking up a fire position and moving. And so there's always two of your men are in a fire position, the others move, and it's quite sort of you're moving rapidly through Crossmaglen out onto one of the exit roads. It's like the centre of a star, Crossmaglen. You have the Cullyhanna Road and the other roads, and it forms like a star, and you needed to get out of Crossmaglen because of snipers, and then you needed to get into the fields. But I do remember coming out one day, and I can't remember what the shop was, but I remember seeing a girl in a shop, and I tried to smile. And I don't know whether it's wishful thinking on my part, but I persisted, and I thought her face cracked a tiny bit. But other than I'm sure that's wishful thinking. But we were under no illusions. I did not expect to be thanked for anything, and I don't think I'm owed anything. I don't consider myself to be owed anything. The only thing I will say is when I was when I finished my training, I wasn't old enough to go to Northern Ireland. You have to be 18. And I was on what's known as rear party because the battalion was deployed in Derry. And I was in Munster which was our base in Germany, and it was the height of the Cold War, so the British Army of the Rhine. And I noticed that some guys who were on rear party had these little ribbons, and I just wanted to have a ribbon. It meant Northern Ireland. It was the only stuff that was going on in those days. And there were other soldiers like me who didn't have a ribbon on their number 2 dress, their service dress. And I remember that being very, very important. And that's a very naive, almost childlike thing. But having a Northern Ireland medal, a General Service Medal for Northern Ireland, that struck me as, got to have one, got to have one. And you have to spend 30 days or 31 days, I can't remember how long, to merit that. But after a while, you just keep going back and forth from Northern Ireland. The whole thing becomes not a drag. I enjoyed the tours. And I enjoyed them because I signed up to be a professional soldier and I wanted to get on the pitch, so to speak. And that was the only way of doing it, other than by going into special forces. So I did enjoy those tours because they were very challenging. And everyone I served with, I would say, conducted themselves in a professional, humane manner. And I will take some comfort from that.
Okay, I was going to ask you, can you talk to me a little about these clashes that you would have with?
Yeah,
first the UDR, and I'm particularly interested because there was such a giant overlap between them and the lawless paramilitaries. It was almost like mandatory.
Yeah, I was, as I said about the guy who replaced a professional soldier in my brick, with a territorial army soldier who just simply wasn't cut out for the job. Again, I'm only talking about my experiences. I'm sure the UDR did a great job in other respects, but my first encounter with them was being shot at by one of them whilst he was unloading his SLR rifle. And I was just stood outside a blast wall in Sant'Angelo Air Base, which is, I think, it's near Belfast. And a high-powered round just shot past my head. And I was thinking, how on earth can you do that when your weapon isn't even cocked? So there's not even how could you do that? So there was also the incident in South Armagh when we were mortared. I think the UDR, I'm not 100% sure, I think the UDR were supposed to secure the premises. And then there was an RUC incident where, when I was in COP, we had a quick reaction force liaison role where, when we were deployed into target surveillance, and this is what I would call driven by direct intelligence, not general intelligence. There's a specific threat. You had to go to the local RUC station, and I understand from the RUC's point of view that no one likes someone coming on your own patch and telling you what to do. But I would have to go into an RUC station, they have an ops board, like a console with the whole area, and I would have to put out of bounds. I would have to mark, this is out of bounds for you and all your policemen. And we started off by doing like a square kilometer where the operation was, but that only attracted these unmarked RUC, which was very unprofessional, because we said, please, as a courtesy, don't come here. And they would come in these enormous, like Ford armor-plated Ford Granadas or Ford Cortinas, and they were so obvious, and they would have been so obvious to anyone, that we started saying, okay, don't put 1 kilometer out of bounds, put 20 square kilometers out of bounds. So, and I remember one RUC officer, a very young guy with he had his holster with a 357 Ruger pistol, and he pulled it out and shot a round off into the RUC. This was in the ops room, and I felt like, who the fuck am I dealing with here? You know, if you do that in the British Army, in the regular army, you're in serious shit. If you
Sorry, explain to me. He was in the RUC station and took out his gun and
he
shot
took
it?
out his gun and accidentally fired off a round into the console where the map is, where I'd just been marking out of bounds and handing the senior RUC guy his orders in a closed envelope. And I understand the friction that coming onto someone else's patch involves, but that shooting, that's twice I've had these kind of near misses with and as I recall, we were concerned about, well, who are these guys? Not so much the RUC, but the UDR. Who are these guys exactly? You know, and this is where I go back to in my. I knew my guys, my regiment were honest soldiers. I don't know, you know, I can't speak for everyone, and I can't speak for every patrol that we ever launched. But that's what I'm talking about this kind of reservation with other security forces in the area. And again, I've been told plenty of times by the RUC, you're only here for 6 months or you're only here for 4 months. You've got no idea what it's like. And I get that. I totally get that. But that's not an excuse to fire at me, albeit in a negligent way. But those, I mean, if we had to count bullets back in, the bullets we took out, the rounds we took out, we had to count them back in one by one, la la la. And if you lost a round in Northern Ireland, that could cost you a week's wages. And not only that, an investigation into where it went, because
like an unaccounted for bullet.
Exactly, because the whole by then the whole process was so litigious. This is why I think I said to you that I don't know whether I mentioned that we tried not to arrest anyone. We tried to get the RUC to arrest, because if we arrested, then 12 months down the line, we get, as a soldier, we could be called back into the province from the UK or anywhere around the world to give evidence or to be accused. The whole thing was so. I had this, rightly or wrongly, I had this image of the RUC firing and the UDR firing off rounds left, right, and centre with no target in sight. So that's what I meant. There were tensions where you have two units or two authorities coming into contact and overlapping. There's always going to be problems. That was there from the start. I knew some very fine UDR soldiers. Well, I remember we called them the girls were called greenfinches, and the UDR. And I remember listening to them on the radio, and with the Northern Ireland accent, instead of saying 0 over, as in November 0 over, I would hear 0 kipper, like that, and that was 0 kipper, and we used to call them kippers because that's what we heard on the air, on the general sort of surveyor. So there was. I'm not talking about. I just felt we didn't dovetail very well.
So if I came along, like, or if someone, you know, if one of your fellow army people came along during your time and said, look, tell me what you think of the following statement: the UDR is chocked full of loyalists, and loads of them are dual members of the UDR and either the UVF or the UDA. Would you have like agreed, disagree, neutral?
At that time, it was suspected. And the thing is, I never had any dealings because of where I was. Always down on the southern border, so always working against the IRA in our IRA-rich country. I never really had any dealings with the UDA or the UVF or the Red Hand Commando or whatever. And there was certainly in our intelligence reports there was talk. There was more than talk. There was intelligence about the UDR being compromised in some sense by unionist terrorist factions. not just wide suspicion. There was intelligence, as far as that goes, into a kind of be careful what you say to these guys. Don't. We were told, do not start speaking of operational material to the UDR or the RUC unless you were working together. Not the UDR. I never worked with the UDR. There were occasions when I worked with the RUC. And I have nothing against the RUC. I'm talking about a couple of, I want to stress, this was my impressions. If someone shoots at you through their negligence, their stupidity, you get an impression. And my view is, what the f are you doing? What is this unit? It would have been the same if it was a British Army unit. Well, it was a British. The UDR were part of the British Army. I don't know whether it still exists even, but
no, they're disbanded. Yeah, thankfully.
it's disbanded. Yeah. Okay. No, so that was it. My reticence there was based on very specific encounters, some of which I understood. The coming, and I don't know. Maybe I was a bit pompous going into an RUC station. I don't. It's not in my character. Maybe I don't know. I don't want to put all the blame. Everything's two-way. Everything's two-way. It's two-way traffic. When you criticize someone, they have the right to come back at you, and I understand that. But that was it for the UDR and RUC.
Yeah, I can understand it from the point of view of the RUC. It's like they all have roots there. They have an address there. People can find out where their fucking granny and their aunt and where their kids go to school. It's not that difficult to find out. You live on a military base, like you're
exactly
not gonna get doorstepped living on an army base. Yeah, it's a different game for them. Yeah,
it is a different game for them, and we were certainly when I was in COT, we were tasked. There were credible threats coming through that a certain XB special was going to be bumped, for example. And this gives you an idea of the conflict, because there would be an XB special living in the middle of nowhere, in the heart of Republican territory, and that struck me as, and like you said, the answer is because that's their route, and it's very difficult to move people from their roots, very difficult, and that, in a way, goes back to the whole problem about how do we resolve the island situation, because the unionists will say, my roots are here, my roots have been here for centuries, and so you have this political problem.
Okay, so have you, like, pretty much you pretty much exclusively did your soldiering in rural areas, right?
Rural areas, apart from Derry.
How long were you in Derry?
30 days. Just enough to get my medal. So it must have been 30 days. I got my ribbon.
Okay, I see. How different did you find urban soldiering versus the rural stuff that you were used to?
More savage. More savage. That hatred is far more obvious and raw, and I mean, in a way, it funded our humor. I think I said to you that sometimes in the soldiering situation, humor is magnified, and you find, I mean, having a pram full of soiled nappies dropped on your head on your patrol. Dropped upon the patrol, there is a sense in which you find that quite humorous, and I don't know why that is, but I think it's the old saying: you have to laugh. Either you laugh or you cry, and no, so those were very difficult days, and I was very young, and I didn't have the full training. I went straight out there because, again, even by 1979, I think that the British Army we were stretched. We needed, given the nature of the operation, which was slowly changing, but we still needed more men than we could ever have. But mainly, I was out on the border, in rural, in a rural settings where where there's, for instance, no vehicle movement. There was no green vehicle movement. There was green vehicle movement in Derry. You could drive around in Humber Pigs or Land Rovers, whereas in South Armagh and Fermanagh you couldn't. You had to fly everywhere. Although you could use unmarked. We used unmarked vans and cars.
Okay, so what? Yeah, I do want to ask you like specifically about South Armagh in a bit, given its reputation and all that. But would you obviously the city of Derry experienced Bloody Sunday, of course, so there's an extra wound on kind of everyone's psyche. But would you compare the hate you got in Derry to the likes that you get in Crossmaglen and South Armagh?
It was more. There was more of a physical. It manifested. Civvies would get in your face in places like the Cregan Estate. I mean, civvies would get in your face. Whereas in Crossmaglen is so small that you're very soon out onto the road and you're into the fields and you've gone. And I don't remember ever seeing a soul on the streets of Crossmaglen. But then again, my memory is not brilliant of that. I can't remember, for instance, whether we slept at Crossmaglen during a tour of Northern Ireland. Certainly, my experience, you only ever slept in sleeping bags. And I can't remember whether we slept at Crossmaglen. It would have been very strange to have been choppered there and then not sleeping there, because we could have been choppered just straight into the field or whatever. But no, so in terms of aggression, in a built-up community like Derry, it's much easier. People find it easier to be hateful in an anonymous sense. You can't arrest everyone who's going to throw something at you. You might, and you don't want to arrest everyone who's going to. That's part and parcel. Although things do get quite hectic there, and they're not terrorists. They're locals who are, So you have that's a tinderbox in a way. That do you understand that you just make the wrong move and that you've got a riot on your hands. Whereas in South Armagh, that doesn't happen. I don't see how that could happen. There's not enough people there.
Interesting. Before I forget it, you mentioned to me before that in your COP days, your close observational, you said that you said that there's names that you see now in Stormont that you remember,
yes,
and both as people who are targets and as people who you were kind of looking to protect.
Yes, yes. Also on the electoral roll, not just Stormont, but I note, unless there are amazing coincidences that two people. I mean, I'm not going to mention her name, but there's one woman who has she's Mary something, and and because her name is so I'll never forget her name, and she used to go through army checkpoints, permanent VCPs, and she used to come through on a bicycle, drop her cacks and crap in the middle of the vehicle check. And I looked her up on the electoral roll, and she was working for Sinn Féin in some capacity. And unless there are two of them, and we laughed in those days, that was like a little pantomime act for someone to do that.
But when you say Sinn Féin and Mary something, people are going to instantly assume Mary Lou MacDonald. I assume.
No, it's not her. No, it's not her. No. But she was It's not her. I'm not going to say her name because I think it would be undignified in a sense. But she was on the periphery of, as so many people were. She was on the periphery of the IRA. She was at the very least, she was a known sympathizer. And when I said to you, the smaller the fish, the bigger the bite, this Mary was like that. She would come through the vehicle checkpoint. We'd let her through and she would drop cacks and dump into the area where we had to go and check vehicles. And I mean, I don't know why I looked up her name. I also looked up the name of someone who is in Stormont, and a relative of theirs was an XB special who we protected, given credible intelligence of a threat. So though I don't know why I do that, but I do like to make those. I just like to see what happened to people. It's not like looking up old friends, but I've nearly given her a name away there. But Mary was for us a comic figure, and I'm sure she would not like to be remembered as that because we just laughed. It was so crazy that she would do that, and that was in the winter, by the way. It was in the winter, so it was easy to bag it and bag the evidence, as it were, and chuck it in the bin. But no, I mean, I keep coming back, or I come back to this idea that humor is magnified. It's you unleash a lot of energy through soldier humor, because these tours you are absolutely living on top of one another. There's very little in the way of personal effect. At Besbrook Mill, we were, I think, 12 to a room on bunks. And there's no lockers, you've got no lockers or anything like that. And you're always either you're resting or you're going out on patrol. And rest is important, so you're sleeping. And same in the golf towers, the golf stations I mentioned, which I hated personally. I hated that. That was a very strange situation. I don't know if they still exist. Do you know the big towers down on South Armagh border?
Yeah.
The big towers. I don't know. Do they still exist?
No, I'm
No, I wouldn't have thought
pretty sure
so.
they're all gone. I'm pretty sure they're all
Yeah,
gone.
because they were. That started to look to me as though things were slipping from our grasp from the British Army side, because suddenly you have these like Nazi towers, like Colditz towers everywhere, and I mean, it wasn't that, but I didn't like serving there. We did patrol from there. But most of that was about climbing up into the tower and using very, very, very powerful. I remember you could overlook Dundalk from Golf 30. You could overlook Dundalk and you could see people. You could make out people. So, and Dundalk, it must have been about 12 kilometers away or 6 kilometers. I'm not 100% sure, but I didn't enjoy that stuff at all.
You told me that for COP, you guys like basically the information, the intel that you were acting on wouldn't be quite enough to kind of get like the SAS in, but it would be for you.
Exactly. My own view, I don't know whether COP existed before we did it. I'd never heard of it. There's a thing in the army called Part 1 orders. That comes out every day. It's basically the CO's generic orders for the battalion. And this thing came up in 1981 on Part 1 orders. It just said special duties, everyone entitled to. So there were no criteria for applying. So an officer tipped me off and said, I was an NCO, a junior NCO at the time. He said, have a crack at this, you'll like it. And nobody knew what it was. So it was about physical fitness, navigation, and weapon handling. So that got whipped down to 30 people. And then we learned what it was. And it was about operating in Northern Ireland away from your battalion and being tasked not by divisional headquarters, but by an agency called the Tasking Coordination Group, or TCG. And they were made up of some pretty high-profile intelligence people. You can imagine that would certainly include RUC Special Branch. And they were, so the evidence, the SAS were overstretched. There's no two ways about this. And I think, I've never read this or had it confirmed, but I've spoken to a lot of people. I've spoken to ex-paras who were involved in the training, who have said this was to try and intelligence is a funny thing. It's like I think I've said to you, in gambling terms, 50-50 odds. It's not very good. I mean, it's how much are you going to wager on that? But intelligence terms, it might be the very best you'll ever get. It's like coming out of a T-junction onto the main road, okay? You may not see much to the left, but eventually you're going to have to take a move because it's the best situation. If you can't see anything to your left, that's the best you'll get. And you act on that intelligence. And I think COT were working on, okay, because the SAS, as far as I understand, they're not going to spend 3 nights and 4 nights and 3 days in a position. They will go there for 1 night on a target, and that pretty much means the target is coming. For us, it wasn't that higher level of intelligence, but it wasn't just, we'll go out there and see what happens. And that's why I mentioned this XP special, that we were there was credible evidence that an attempt would be made on his life. And we had the opportunity, we could either go inside his house. He was an absolutely foul piece of work. And we decided the best thing would be to he didn't want us in his house for a start. And okay, it's his house. But we were there to protect him. So we had, I cannot remember whether it was 3 4-man teams or 2 4-man teams doing this. But we would go out and we had been trained in Ballykinler by mountain leaders from Royal Marines, 18 Signals Regiment people, SAS people, parachute pathfinders. So this training was very, very serious. It's the best thing I've ever done in the army. There's a lot of physical stuff, but most of it was on learning how to use quite technical stuff. For instance, pieces, which are protect a seismic intruder defense. That's this strange army jargon, which meant you could, around your OP, which you've got 4 people crammed into, I don't know where you're sitting now, but imagine half your room and you've got 4 people in there with a lot of optics. You put these pieces, they're seismic detectors. So you put spikes in the ground all the way around you, and you can set them to certain levels of sensitivity. I.e., a rabbit moves, you'll know about it. Now, normally you want to know if there's something heavier than a rabbit going past. Also, there were claymores. They weren't called claymores, they were called pads, or protector area defense. And these were like claymores. They were explosives that blew outwards from the OP. Because we were very vulnerable. And this has happened. It happened in Drummer-Caval. It happened in Glasdrumman. Half-cocked army OPs were getting bumped. So this wasn't, by the time we went to Ballykinler and NIPG, this was very serious. And we were very highly trained. We had different weapons from, we had different equipment from what we would call green troops. So I loved that. That was one of the best experiences of my life because I'd never had any aspirations for going into the SAS or anything like that. But this was to say there's that famous. I think Lewis Collins once said he rubbed shoulders with the SAS in the actor from. He might have been a territorial army parachute regiment, but you could say as a kind of we rubbed shoulders with the SAS, and I mean that would be a kind of a jokey thing to say, but they were brilliant. They were absolutely first-rate instructors, and the conditions we operated in were terrible, absolutely appalling. And I remember one night, and again the humour side of it, it was about -13 with wind chill. If you factor in wind chill, we were in an OP very close to the target, about 100 meters from the target. And one of my mates needed to have a crap. And everything you take into that OP, you take out. There's no cooking, there's no smoking, there's no washing, there's no brushing your teeth. You're there for about 4 nights and 3 days. You're always inserted at night. You're always taken out at night by you're dropped off very sort of 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning in an unmarked van. And so everything you shit and everything you piss has to come back out with you. Otherwise it stinks. And some animals are one of the big problems of doing this kind of soldiering, because dogs come sniffing around. We had a spray called fuck off dog spray, FODS. And it was just a pepper spray. It didn't harm them. And I don't think I ever used it. But anyway, a mate of mine was having a crap. So he sorted out his little square of cling film. And the standard operating procedure was, if someone needed to have a crap, everybody gets up. So there's 2 people normally in a sleeping bag, without zips, without Velcro. Okay, so there's no noise. They're in their sleeping bags. The other 2, one is on the machine gun, the other is occupied with monitoring signals and also using the optics. So one of the guys in the sleeping bag wanted to have a shit. Everybody gets up, they man their posts, and my friend dropped. I mean, literally right next to me. We could almost brushing one another. He crapped into this piece of cling film, and it bounced off and rolled down into a part of the bush, part of the blackthorn bush, and he was there on all fours rummaging around with his fingerless gloves trying to find this thing we had to bring it back. It had to go, and but that the 4 of us, well, the 3 of us in fact, were dying to laugh. I mean, we were biting our lips, and it's like, again, this magnified sense of humor. But that one night I remember, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, very dark, very cold. And I remember this ear-piercing scream. It was from the support. I mean, it really was. It was a horrendous scream. And it was from the support OP. And one of the soldiers had gone down with frostbite, and he'd unlaced his boot. And his foot ballooned up straight away, to the point that he had half of his foot amputated, and he was invalided out. The conditions were very rough, and one of the things that we would discuss in debriefs is, you know, at that level, how fit are you to fight in the event that you get bumped by the IRA? And it was tough soldiering, but I enjoyed that. It's the best thing I ever did.
Okay, so speaking of the SAS and speaking of Intel, I believe you said in a comment left on one of my videos, which actually led us to being able to speak. So thank you very much for that. I think you said that you agreed with Harry McCallion in his assertion that the East Tyrone lads at Loughall were set up by their higher ups.
I'm not in a position. I did say that, and I remember the Harry McCallion interview, and there was a feeling after Loughall in intelligence services that there was internal fighting, and that was coming down to my level of soldiering. I wasn't in COP at that stage. That was in 1982. This was 1988. So there was a sense in which the internal fighting between the brigades. That said, I made that remark in ignorance of the fact that Liner, who died as a result of that, was East Tyrone and not Fermanagh. So I got confused about that. So I wouldn't want to go further than that. All I remember is very strong intelligence that there was infighting, but that's not unusual between brigades. Between the brigades, there was some stuff coming out in Fermanagh when I was in COP, and that was much more. You know, there were people. We're talking punishment shootings, and you know, the IRA short and shrift with their own problems. Those are dealt with, or were dealt with, very quickly. I mean, I remember on a patrol, a body was found of an IRA. He was on our cue cards, and he'd had a punishment shooting. He was assassinated and left for us. I think that's a specific message also, because there's this risk of booby-trap. We used to carry paracord. I don't know if that makes sense. Paracord as parachute regiment. The sort of cord you use on a parachute. Used to carry about 200 feet of it in order to yank the body, to put it brutally, in case it was booby-trapped. I mentioned also we carried stuff like party string before entering a building, because that was I don't know whoever thought that one up. That was a brilliant innovation. Often these innovations are very crude.
Sorry, you told me before, but explain to the viewers what the party string actually does.
The party string is there are a lot of a lot of work on rural patrolling is searching, and you will search disused buildings. There's disused buildings all over the place. And one of the problems with that is, the obvious problem is a tripwire. I mean, the IRA were ingenious at booby-trapping. And I'm sure that we, the British, have learned a lot about booby-trapping from the IRA. But we used to carry these canisters, like an aerosol canister, of what we call party string, and it's like a very, very, very thin foam, and it just floats down, and it's not enough to detonate a tripwire, but it just rests on the tripwire, which to the naked eye you won't see. So we had little tricks like that, and there were other, not a trick, but you had to be on the lookout for, when you things like 2 strands of barbed wire. You notice that you're walking along a hedge line or a field demarcation, and you notice you've got double strand barbed wire, and suddenly it becomes 3-strand barbed wire. And you think, what's that all about? And that could be an antenna, or what we call a trailing antenna, for an IRA bomb or a landmine. We call it a landmine. And certainly by 1987, perhaps it was before that as well, we had electronic countermeasures against, and you would hear it. You wore an earpiece, and if you were near a landmine and near enough for the IRA man to detonate, you would hear in your earpiece a pinging. And of course, you hope to hell the battery wouldn't run out at that point, because you'd be dead. But that was sobering. That was a very sobering thought. And that's why I mentioned right at the beginning of this, that piece of equipment was left out in the middle of nowhere by the Territorial Army soldier. So that, you know, that was a very important piece of equipment. And I think there were 2 per patrol on different frequencies. And they're on a very broad band of frequencies, and they were very effective. Sometimes you would see one indication that you were near an event of that type.
We were just talking about the fact that you like generally speaking, you wouldn't kind of like speak much about your memories and in general, right?
That's right. I don't see many people. The last time, when I was in England, the last time I bumped into guys from my regiment, and the news was always bad. I'd ask, how's so and so? he's committed suicide. How so and so? He's in Winchester prison. And eventually, I didn't adjust at all coming out of the army. I didn't adjust at all. In those days, I don't know what it's like now. I hope it's better. But you were literally out on you were out on your ear. You had nothing. I had no skills. I was suddenly. But anyway, so I don't. And but believe me, civilians, my civvy mates, such as they are. I live in France, and nobody wants to hear about it. It's so I don't talk about it. I'm not interested in talking about it. I was very sort of not flattered by, but when you proposed this, I thought, yeah, that would be nice for me, because it is a part of my life. It's a massive part of my life, and I do treat it very seriously. And I hear people saying stuff, and I think, but what do you know? I mean, so I do feel that I have a valid input. Let me put it that way.
Absolutely. God above. I mean, literally, I'd speak to anyone at all who was on the ground in some kind of like active way. Anyone at all who was like that, I'd be interested in speaking to them and getting their story out, and adding to the history of the whole thing, which I think is important. More information is generally good. Okay, I won't keep you. I won't keep you too much longer. So let me ask you. Right, you were stationed in South Armagh for a bit. Can you talk to us a bit about the reputation that the area and that brigade had amongst ye?
It was deemed to be it's called Bandit Country, and Bandit Country means South Armagh. It doesn't mean a little bit of East Tyrone. It doesn't mean Fermanagh. Bandit Country was South Armagh, and when we learned that we were going to South Armagh, there was a sense in which this is our first real tour. That's how mythical, if you like, the South Armagh Brigade were, steeped in lore and tradition. I mean, if for instance, if you did Ballykinler, I mean, well, that's nothing, that's a soft posting. I don't say things like that. I mean, it's all the troubles. But South Armagh was very serious stuff, and we always took stuff seriously, but there was this extra thing about, look, this is the South Armagh Brigade. They used to zero their weapons down on a place called Sailor Street, which is right on the border. And there was this sense that they were quite bold, that they knew exactly what they were about. I mean, they've come unstuck. Various IRA cells have come unstuck with the British Army, and have sometimes they've bitten off more than that they can chew. But in South Armagh, we thought, this is Bandit Country. You have to be right on top of your toes. This is the rightly or wrongly. I mean, a Fermanagh for me was that was a very hard tour. And those guys were very professional, the South Fermanagh Brigade. But no, it always had a reputation, South Armagh.
If I come along during your time there, if I was like a journalist or something, if I said, look, can you characterize why this area and this particular brigade are of such cause such damage to the British Army? I mean, literally, when the whole thing was said and done, 1/5 of all British Army casualties came in this 200 square mile.
I didn't know that. But that's interesting. Sorry, John, I cut you off.
If I asked you at the time, like, characterize what makes this area and these particular fellas, the South Armagh / North Louth IRA, what makes them so it's such good guerrilla soldiers?
The first thing I would say is illegal vehicle checkpoints. Does that make sense? Illegal, and normally the British Army, it would be a fatal mistake by the British Army to think, hey, it's we that do the vehicle checkpoints, not you. The IRA in South Armagh, were very good at doing illegal vehicle checkpoints. Now, there's nothing new in that, but they were very good at doing it, and to catch them at it was sometimes beyond the ken of the regular soldiers, and you needed people like 14 Intelligence, SAS to be like getting involved in that, because they were just too good at it. Does that make sense? That's one reason why South Armagh was, there was no, the other thing was there, I don't know who the bomber was. I can't remember who their chief quartermaster was. You had Tom Murphy, Slab Murphy, and all his money going into South Armagh Brigade. As far as I know, I mean, I'm not an intelligence expert, and I wouldn't want to say otherwise. But Thomas Slab Murphy, I mean, he was nicknamed that because he dropped paving slabs on the legs of people who upset him.
Really? I heard, sorry to interrupt, I heard that the whole family had the name Slab because they're like built like a slab.
Okay, I didn't know that, but I did know the family is enormous. They are big lads. I'd heard that he dropped paving slabs on the knees of people he didn't like, but there is somewhere on YouTube a thing about the very young Murphy family. By the time I was there, Tom Murphy was I don't know, middle-aged, but there was, and him and I can't remember his name. Murphy was a big name in South Armagh, and he attracted a lot of RUC activity, and therefore he attracted a lot of army protection around the RUC. The RUC wanted to get onto Slab's the northern part of his farm complex, but no, I can't remember. I think I said to you in an email that, ironically, because it's more recent, my memories of South Armagh are actually less poignant than my memories of Fermanagh, and part of that is because it was a relentless circus of patrolling from 3 bases, and the Besbrook Mill, Crossmaglen, and the Gulf stations, and I was at Gulf 30 and for a little bit at Gulf 40, which overlooked Fort Kill. But so yeah, the reputation of South Armagh preceded our visit. You know, it had long been, I don't know how it, your statistic there about 1/5 of military casualties, but physically it is, I don't know, if I look at Fermanagh, there are so many little places like Rosslea, Balik in the west, I think, Rosslea in the east, Listener Ski. These are, it's heavily populated by little significant communities, whereas it seems to me that South Armagh wasn't. South Armagh was a wilderness, and it's very easy to imagine a lot of IRA activity going undetected. And not activity, I mean movement, literally moving around, moving weapons around, planning, getting to the quartermaster, arming up, all that stuff, and implementing what we call spectaculars, which was a big IRA attack. And it seemed, my recollections of being on the ground there was that this is not like Fermanagh, where you have all these operational bases. There was Crossmaglen in Fermanagh, in Armagh, obviously, and Crossmaglen was a sniper's paradise in many respects. It had that reputation. Luckily, I don't think we lost anyone there, not at Crossmaglen. But so in terms of its infamy, if you like, for the British Army, it was infamy. It had this reputation well before we arrived.
Funny, you mentioned earlier about the vehicle checkpoints. There was actually an ambush on an ambush that you mentioned earlier, which was Glasdermon. That was actually, I believe it was the whole operation was to crack down on these, and the team that was in the van in the scrapyard that got turned into Swiss cheese pretty much. They were like a support unit for the army, the little army unit that was going to actually go
Yeah.
after the people doing the checkpoints. Yeah. Did you ever encounter any of the Murphys or anything like that, like stopping them? Or
Only from a distance, Thomas, from a distance, because the RUC, like I said earlier, that we wanted the RUC to do all the arresting if it came to that. No one was going to arrest Thomas Murphy. He was too long in the tooth for that. He'd covered his tracks with his I don't know what to call it, tax evasion system. He crossed pigs from one. Yeah, that's so. But the RUC did want to get on his property, and I remember a patrol where we were supporting the RUC overlooking Slab Murphy's farm. I can't remember whether I saw him or not. That would be a stab in the dark. But I never spoke to him. I never had any dealings with him.
And were you referring earlier to a piece of footage on YouTube? It's from, like, I think it's like 68 or 69, and it's these fellas like basically catching up with him in regards to like the smuggling. They have like this awkward, this kind of awkward exchange where he's like going up to them with the microphone, but they kind of won't touch him, and it's almost, I swear to God, I don't mean to make light of it, but like when you consider what the next 3 decades held, Slab and that family.
I know. I was struck by that. His brother was on that strip, on that bit of film. His brother was on that bit of film. And
on that note, on the smallness of it, he has a stick in his hand.
He has a stick in, yeah, and
he kind of threatens the interviewer, like.
Yeah, and that was I mean, that was. I had a lot of respect for the. I don't know who the journalists were, whether it was from RTE or BBC, who went down to challenge the Murphy family. But that took a bit. That took balls to do that. They were on camera, but that could have easily been. But no, I didn't meet Slab Murphy. There was too much else going on, and for me, I didn't enjoy the South Armagh tour as much. I don't know why. I can't put it into words. There was Golf 30, which I hated. That existence. We were underground. We had a tiny little kitchen area. We had a dog. I love animals, but we had a dog that killed all the rats because it was that kind of almost World War I style existence. We had a tiny cooking area where you could knock up bacon and egg sandwich, egg banjos, we called them. That was, I don't know where that word came from, but egg banjos. And we'd be up in the tower and we'd ring down to someone on rest in the trench and say, could you knock up a couple of egg banjos and bring them up to the tower? And that was a weird thing, because climbing up the tower, you wondered, I don't know, it was about 10, maybe 20 feet perpendicular ladder. I fell down it once and I actually have an injury, which I never reported. I reported it, but that was a day that was an era where, well, it's just an injury. What are you whinging about? Have some. I was actually given dihydrocodone. I don't know. That's a morphine derivative for that fall, and then for a blast in Glasdermon where a bomb went off, or it was possibly an explosive stump which just blew up. I'm not 100% sure which it was, but we were caught up in that. And that's very Glasdermon, because there are 2 Glasdermons. There's another one far to the east on the Irish Sea. This one is in South Armagh, and it has a massive church. I don't know if you know it, the area. It has an
I wouldn't be.
enormous church for such a small community, and a bomb went off, or it wasn't a bomb; it was an ammunition stump that was unstable and went off. I don't fully get that, because ammonium nitrate was illegal in Northern Ireland, and to go off on its own, I think it would have had to have been ammonium nitrate, or it was urea with a detonator. But anyway, that went off, and I still have I have very bad ears. I can, if I live in France, rural France. If I, and it's very hilly, mountainous, and if all I need to do is to go up 200 meters or descend 200 meters, and my ears, the pain is horrendous in the change in air temperature. So that I'll never forget. And again, it was not considered a thing, if I can put it like that. Anyway, but so no, I sorry, I've lost my track. We were talking about South Armagh and why it was
more kind of a more. That's great. We went into it. I just wanted to ask you as like a second last question almost. You mentioned to me before that the IRA you kind of respected the fact that they evolved their methods and their their ways of getting at you, and they were constantly evolving. Can you maybe tell us, like, from the point of view of a soldier, what was like the most prominent steps of evolution?
Okay. In my experience, between Fermanagh in 1982 and 1987, excuse me, 1987, the whole booby-trap thing had gone onto a new level. That I remember, I have somewhere a very old Anforblacht poster that says state authorized slaughter, and it has Jim Callaghan, the Prime Minister, the ex-Prime Minister, Jim Callaghan, bizarrely Jim Callaghan, not Harold Wilson, but state authorized slaughter. It's the same initials as SAS. And that was ripped off a wall. Now, you couldn't do that by 1987 because the IRA had booby-trapped everything. Everything that looked like, "Ooh, I'll have some of that for a souvenir," had become the idea. Certainly in Northern Ireland training, you taught if you lose something like a water bottle pouch, okay, you had to report it because they'd be all over that very quickly. So that was one area in which they'd evolved, because now, as I recall, and this isn't, I'm not 100% sure of this, I remember that the RUC and the UDR were taking a lot of hits at that time by recovering objects that were in fact booby-trapped. And so that's one area in which they technologically they were absolutely up to speed with everything else that was going on. But the other thing that I would credit them was that in the street, the cue card people who weren't on the run had changed. They were playing a different game. They weren't petty or you British bastard. They were far more psychologically. They were far more complicated, complex, not complicated, complex. And that means you were playing a game. You were playing a game with them, and you had to kind of work out what the rules were. There's no good losing your temper or any of that kind of nonsense. That was, and I felt that what we're dealing with here is. I look back and I think of things like the Special Operations Executive during the Second World War, how they couldn't react to certain things as I'm British and blah, blah, blah. And similarly, IRA couldn't say, up there are. And so they had to kind of play a game with you. And having said that, the possibility of a firefight. I'm talking small arms ammunition. A one-on-one firefight, a patrol meets a sniper, that had decreased enormously by 1987 in South Armagh. Now, is that patrol craft on our side, or is it? I don't know, but the chances of having a firefight with the IRA had drastically diminished. Now, I don't know why that is. I suspect did they have the weapons? I think they did. I just don't think it was a savvy tactics on their part, and they had modified their MO to things like illegal vehicle checkpoints, which we used to try to chase them in helicopters. That was called eagle patrolling, when you actually sat on the edge of the helicopter ski and you chased these illegal. You chased the IRA and the cars until they crossed the border and you couldn't go any further. But they changed all that, and it was they were less visible. They were less visible. There was less in South Armagh. It was less obvious that there was an enemy, and that was very worrying. That caused intelligence a huge amount of problems at my level, if you see what I mean.
Would I be correct in saying that, like you just mentioned intelligence, like South Armagh was kind of notoriously tough to penetrate. This had an effect on a lot of things that, like the South Armagh brigade. I think the number is 8. They only lost like 8 guys in the entire 30 years. A few jail, but like they really didn't take that many hits for Belfast.
No, exactly. Exactly. For us, I mean, jailing to arrest somebody. I mean, we arrested quite a few in Derry. I'm not so sure about Fermanagh, but no, I don't remember an arrest being made in South Armagh, and these guys were they just disappeared, even though they left their fingerprints all over the place. Once they'd done what they'd done, they just disappeared back into the night, and that was what gave. They were ghostly. They were like phantoms and that gave the South Armagh Brigade its reputation, I think, if that's the word.
Interesting. Okay, cool. And thank you very much now for everything you've shared. All the time you spent. The insight is fascinating, and the amount of detail. And thank you very much. And,
thank you, John. I just want to finish by saying I said some stuff that will upset some people. I don't mean to upset anybody. These are just my recollections from, and I hope that the Irish people, all of them, have peace now.
Thank you.
So thanks, John. Thanks very much, John, for giving me that opportunity.
Can I say, I guess you kind of did it. I always end by just asking was there anything else you wanted to kind of mention or drop in or anything that you were looking forward to getting to but we didn't, or anything?
No, I don't think so. I think we touched a lot of stuff. I'm pretty exhausted. Like I said to you, I don't talk about this ever. So this was quite an experience for me, and I enjoyed your chat with Harry McCallion. That's what there is another podcast called The Troubled Land. I don't know whether you know that. It's a YouTube podcast called The Troubled Land.
I think it's not a podcast. It's like a collection of like footage from the time, right?
It could be that. I've met a lot of abuse on there, and I understand that, and that's what I meant about posterity. I said I served. I like watching that footage, because it brings back a lot of memories. And I think I left a couple of comments saying I served there and blah blah blah, and you get a lot of flack back from the followers of the troubled land, and I understand that. But I have absolutely no. I have nothing but hope for the peace process, that it continues, and that there's no more death.
Thank you very much again. Appreciate it all. And we might speak again sometime anyway.
Yeah, I hope so. That would be nice. Thanks, John.